Welcome to the Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast, where we explore the local arts culture in the Lehigh Valley. We'll be doing this through conversations with individual artists, administrators, and organizations. We'll explore all types of mediums with the goal of enriching local culture.
Welcome back to Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast. As always, I'm Elise.
And I'm Ben.
And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. So Elise, last week, you had a pretty art-filled weekend and week.
I did, absolutely. Yeah. So on Friday, I went to the closing reception of the Glass Show at the Bethlehem House Gallery.
Nice.
Which was lovely. I met a few new artists, a couple guests we're going to have coming up on the show, and it was lovely just to see all of the glass work one more time.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah. So the Glass Show is finished, and then they'll be opening their new show on June 25th. So by the time this episode comes out, you should be able to go check it out.
Yeah.
There is a former podcast guest, Abby Roscoe, will have her work exhibited in that new show. So
yes. Looking forward to seeing that.
Have to go check it out.
Man, Elizabeth and I wanted to make that closing gallery so bad, but we left for our honeymoon, so we were not able to attend.
Sound like you had a pretty art-filled week on your trip. So.
Yes. Hopefully we'll talk about that at another point.
Yes. And I also went to 3 nights of the Southside Film Institute's annual Southside Film Festival.
Nice.
So it was the 17th Southside Film Festival. They had a fantabulous logo this year of cicadas with little film reels for the eyes. So I love that. And at the beginning of some of the blocks, they had like an animation on the screen of the cicadas like fluttering around. I was trying to exhibit my fluttering. Fluttering around, and then the film reels turning their eyeballs. So I thought that was very fun, very artsy. But yeah, the film festival was wonderful. It was back in person this year, so congratulations to them. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's awesome. So you were able to go to a number of shorts blocks and feature blocks, correct?
Yes. So I went to the opening night on Tuesday it was held at the Lehigh Valley Charter Arts High School.
Okay.
And then the other 2 nights, I went to the animation block, which was held at Touchstone Theater, and a late night horror showing, which was like a special event, also held at Touchstone Theater.
Nice.
Yeah. They had a great film, and there was many that I saw, but the documentary feature that was there for the opening evening was titled Women of Steel, directed by Robin Murphy. It was a filmmaker out of Australia, but it was created about a town where steel was the primary industry in Australia. So
how fitting.
Obviously chosen for the festival for a reason.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed it. It was a great story about fighting discrimination in the workplace, in the steel industry, and the culture and personality of these women in Australia in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So absolutely adored that.
Oh, that's so cool.
Can't wait to find it online at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's very good.
Do you have a short from any of the shorts blocks that really stood out to you? There's
actually a local gentleman, John Wrigley, who had a short in the animation block titled A Tale of Two Viruses. It was only about 3 minutes, but the line here in the book says 2 anthropomorphized coronaviruses debate the morality of what they're doing to the human race. So I liked that one a lot.
Oh, man.
He did a little Q&A at the end and said that he had written the story for it and then sent it to an animator, and it was all done over Zoom and over quarantine.
Oh, wow.
So congrats, John. That was fabulous. Really liked that one.
Oh, that's fun.
Then there's another one, which in the same animation block. Also, I don't think the gentleman was local, but he was there to answer Q&A, but it was called UFO versus Dinosaur.
Oh my
goodness. It was a quick 2-minute claymation, which I just thought was absolutely hysterical and very fun. So I really did enjoy everything. It's funny because I am not the film buff in this podcast setting. So it was kind of fun going through this and then saying, oh man, I can't wait to go back home and like share this with Liz and Ben when they get back from their vacations.
Yeah, for sure.
It was a really good time. So congratulations, awesome. Southside Film Fest. You did it again.
Well, we have a very exciting guest this week, and we are going to have Elizabeth read her bio.
Laurie Storlie Wagner is a multi-dimensional next-level creative. She has worked as an actor and voiceover artist for over 20 years. She is a certified hypnotherapist. She hosted a weekly radio show. She started an all-female improv comedy troupe in Los Angeles. that won Best in Fest at the Southern Improv Festival and was invited to perform their brand of improv at festivals all over the country. She was a semi-professional pool player and played in a pro qualifier while in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy. She had a baby 100% naturally at the age of 45, and she started her child care program in Santa Monica, California that became wildly successful. She has been a parent support provider for the last 13 years, and she is currently an online parent support coach. She believes that incorporating the rules of improv with modern parenting can and will help overwhelmed parents get out of survival mode and transform their parenting so that they can lean into the joy of parenting. She has over 20 years of improv comedy training and has trained with, performed with, and produced with some of the best in the business of comedy and improv. She currently hosts a podcast called Improvised Parenting, in which she chats with fellow improvisers who are also parents, as well as other experts who further the concept of being an improvised parent.
Laurie, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We've been so excited for today.
No,
we really have.
It's been a topic of conversation for a couple months.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, hang on. I'm going to go run around the studio. I'll be right back.
I'll give a shout out to Shay Zukowski and JuxtaHub because that's how you and I met.
Yeah.
Which was really exciting. And I think Shay had deemed it the podcast posse, and it was a collection of local Lehigh Valley, all women actually. She dubbed it the podcast posse, which I have effectively renamed Elizabeth, Ben, and my group chat. So thank you,
true.
Shay, for the inspiration.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
My gosh. Yeah, I love those guys over at JuxtaHub. I mean, I can tell you that their press release that came out maybe 2 years ago, when I saw it, I was like, this is a vision I had in 2018 before I moved out here. So I immediately got in touch with Joyce and I said, we got to connect, and so much of what she wanted to bring to JuxtaHub was so much of what I'd already, I've been doing my whole life as, creatives. We have so many different outlets for our creativity. And you're like, well, when we see something that has so many elements of who you are in one place, you have to do it.
Yeah, definitely an embodiment of you and your work, because something that you had sent in, I'm going to read it off here so I don't get it wrong, but you describe yourself as a multi-dimensional next level creative, which I love.
Yeah. And I think that so many people identify as that because, in the past, we talked about this earlier about how society has told us you're this or you're that. Labeling is becoming a thing of the past, labeling what I do and who I am. And I just, I am this multi-level creative. I can see and do anything I want to. I just have to make the choice. Right. And a lot of times you gravitate towards things that, you just do to do. It's never for a career, it's if it's intrinsically motivated, you're not doing it for the money. You're not doing it for a career, or anything like that. You're doing it because you can't not do it. And a lot of actors will tell you that I can't not act. So on the weekends, I'm at all the improv jams and, I'm in every theater production I can do. And, I'm always doing stuff and it's always for free. I mean, actors don't get paid. Musicians don't get paid that much unless they're really lucky.
True.
Yeah. So I'll jump right to our creative process question because that process for you is probably really different from someone who is more, I don't like the word focused, but like directed in a single medium.
Yeah.
So in your creative process, whether it be podcasting, whether it be improv, parenting as an art form.
Yeah.
How does that creative process start? Does it just start with creating a space to allow yourself to be creative? And then where does it go from there?
Like most creative things, it starts with an idea. So an idea will pop into your head and you want to give it legs. You want to, sometimes the idea will be right there immediately. I was telling you the story of how my podcasts came to fruition. And I didn't even think I was going to do a podcast. I knew about podcasting. There was talk about podcasting. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people were listening in on podcasts and doing podcasts. But what really spurred it for me was that little competitive spirit, because an article came out in the New York Times by Paul J. Underwood, and it was called Yes and Clean Your Room. And I have been talking about yes and parenting. In fact, before improvised parenting, my parent coaching was called Yes and Parenting, because it's based on the rules of improv. But I switched it to improvised parenting because I thought that, well, improvising means something different to everybody. It could mean like a jazz improviser. It could be like a MacGyver type of improviser. Or, we improvise daily in life. We all improvise, not just parents.
Yes.
Like one of my friends, Bill Cott, said that we are... not every improviser is a parent, but every parent is an improviser. Because it's true. We're always going by the seat of our pants. And I always felt the most comfortable doing that. So this article made me go, hey, he's talking about what I'm talking about. But he didn't call me and interview me for this article. That's got to change. So I started reaching out to everybody that was in the article. And I said, can I interview for my podcast that I didn't have yet? And I got some people that said yes. And the first guest I had on my podcast was Paul Valancourt, who was one of my teachers. He was the guy that brought Improv Olympic to LA. He's part of like the biggest team in, improv, Beer Shark Mice. Everybody on that team is a celebrity. They were just on Celebrity Family Feud. He was my coach. He was my teacher. He was my mentor. And he was my first guest on my podcast. And I love him dearly. And so he jumped on with me and we just started talking about improv and parenting. And it just came, it just kind of fell into place. So that's my artistic process, is when I say yes and I just go for it, everything seems to just fall into place.
So step one, yes and go.
Yes and go. Yeah, that's right. That's so true, Ben, because yes is the first step, to say yes to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On your resume, you have quite an extensive list of things.
It's crazy, I know. Who is this crazy person? She must be lying.
Some of them include parent, improv comedian, child development expert, hypnotherapist, radio show host, actor, voiceover artist, and semi-professional pool player.
Yes, ma'am.
And pro qualifier while in your third trimester of pregnancy.
I'm afraid it's all true, people. Every single bit of it. I don't have enough time to tell you all about it, but,
Well, what came first?
Oh, this is the existential question, isn't it? So what came first for me was moving to California because I got a job offer. The company I was working for here closed. And one of the people that used to work there had moved out to California to start a record label for Robert Fripp. And they were struggling. And he said, we need Wagner, which is my maiden name, which all the cool people know me by. And so he reached out to me and I was like, perfect timing, dude, because this place is shutting down. So my boyfriend and I packed up everything in a 1978 Ford Econoline van and drove across the country. And we were in Long Beach. There was, like homeless people sleeping in our van and stuff. It was cool. It was all good. But what happened from that was, I'm in a new place. I'm culturally in shock. And I don't know what to do with myself. But one thing I did know how to do was play pool, because I always had a pool table in my basement. Yeah. So I found a place in Long Beach to play pool, and I went and I played pool. And it's hard to explain, but there's something so zen about doing something that you're good at and you love doing. Mm-hmm. And that's what I encourage people to really just tap into, is I know I'm good at playing pool because math makes sense to me. I'm mathematically inclined. I think math is the universal language. So for me to play pool, it's almost like it's a next level thing. When I'm playing pool, I can't explain it. It's another realm. of existence for me. And, you know, it just made sense that I would just try to join a pool playing community, which I did. And from that pool playing community, I joined a league. And from that league, I went to Vegas every year and played on teams that competed with teams from all over the world. And then, you know, came the competitive, like, hey, let's get on the pro tour kind of thing. And I did, you know, so there was a qualifier in San Diego and I was in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy and I was like, why not? Yes, and I'll be right there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it was funny trying to like make a shot with a big old belly in front of me, but it was good times. It was a good time. A good story too. Yeah.
Very impressive. So moving from semi-professional pool player, that concept of yes and, is that what led you to all of these other things as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because the job itself is what led me to go to California. Yes. I'll go buy a big old van and fit my stuff in it and come there. Yes. You know, and then the job that he offered me was just not right for me. It wasn't a good fit. So I, you know, moved on to work in the commercial production industry. And I was working in commercial production for a little while. And then I ended up working at 20th Century Fox. And that led to me working. This is all going to like all these things connect because the story I was telling you earlier about my pool tables. So working at 20th Century Fox, this story is amazing in itself because the commercial production company I worked with was vying to get Jean-Pierre Jeunet, the French film director, to be a director for their commercials because that's how he started in France. He was a commercial director, and they were really like trying to get him to come over. And my job, I left the commercial production company and went to work at 20th Century Fox on the film Alien Resurrection that Jean-Pierre was directing. So it was so crazy. Like that connection was there. Yeah. Okay. And then Jean-Pierre had a wrap party at his house and he told me he had a pool table, or his assistant told me he had a pool table. And we were the first ones there. And I walk in and she goes, come in, see my swimming pool, my alien, you know. And I was like, where's the pool table? You know, like I'm a total geek, right? I'm like, where's the pool table? And she's like, oh, you play? I will have to play you sometime. And then, so I'm like eyeing up the food table and his assistant comes up to me and she goes, Jean-Pierre is ready to play you now. And I was like, okay. And I went downstairs and played Jean-Pierre Jeunet on his pool table and I won. And he, you know, graciously excused himself to go back to the party. But the next time I saw him, he's like, we'll play again. And I was like, yeah, of course we will.
Yes, and I'll win.
Yes, and he played the hardest game in pool, which is one pocket. He knew it very well. So he was a much better player than I was. It was, you know, like it was just kind of like, you know, he's playing a girl and, you know, man. I don't know. He probably wasn't taking it seriously. Who knows? Jean-Pierre, don't listen to this, okay? And so the next time we played, he won. And then we had to have a rematch. But the way he said it to me with his broken English, I didn't understand. He said, we'll have to play again this time for the pool table. And I was like, and he's like, no, I'm very serious. And I was like, yes. Okay, yes, and absolutely. So I got his pool table. I took out all the furniture in my 1-bedroom loft, and I had his pool table in my house for many, many years until I had a baby.
I was going to say, do you still have the pool table?
No, I had to let it go because, you know, when I had the baby, we needed space for her. So it was so wonderful because he was one of my favorite film directors. Now, Ben, we can talk film all day long. Now, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, I don't know if you know who he is, but his first film, Delicatessen, I mean, I don't stare at my goosebumps because, oh my God, that movie is so amazing. It's just amazing because of its lightness around a heavy subject and the musicality of it. Like the rhythm of the movie is insane and the intelligence of the movie is insane. And like the direction, the eyes that he sees through are so enticing and just, oh my God, romantic and lovely and beautiful.
Continuing the legacy of French art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, he was obviously influenced, by that.
100%.
So, and, going back to how art influences us, exposure to art is so important
Definitely.
to us, from early on, because it influences the way we see the world. So we see something in art and we use it as a filter for how we see other things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you brought up Alien Resurrection, which I think is hilarious because that was my first rated R movie.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God. The
I watched it at 4 a.m. Christmas morning when I woke up and my parents were like, you have to go back to bed. And I'm like, I'm not going back to bed. I'm going to wait and I'm going to watch something on TV until you guys wake up. And so then I went outside and then I got in so much trouble.
Oh my gosh.
But it was worth it.
The big deal about that was that 3 wasn't that good. And Joss Whedon had written the script for Resurrection and Sigourney Weaver couldn't put it down. So it was interesting.
Yeah. From LA. That was your first time moving to LA?
No. I mean, when we were kids, we moved back and forth, I think 2 or 3 times because my dad's sister, Mary, she lived out in LA. And so she would always try to get my dad, lure my dad out because he was her favorite brother. Oops, I hope you're not listening, other brothers. Anyway, everybody knew that. But so, we as a family did that cross-country trip a few times. Yeah. In an old Corvair,
Nice.
And it was pretty cool. And so, we did a couple stints there. And for my mom would always get tired of it. So that's how we ended up back here. And for my graduation from high school, my parents were like, well, what do you want for your present? And I said, I want to go out to California. Something inside me, I just knew I was meant to be there. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so that's what they got me. I went and stayed with my Aunt Mary for my senior graduation and I knew I was going to move there. I called up my uncle a few years later. I think that was when I was 17 and then I worked for a couple of years. The first time I went out was just to go out. Okay. So that was just to be there for a little bit. And I stayed with another aunt and just to be there by myself and figure it out. And that was tricky, talk about culture shock when you're just 20 years old. And the beauty of that was I felt grown up because I had auditioned for a movie in Philadelphia. And they were looking for, I think, 10 or 12 dancers to be in this movie called The In Crowd. And I was one of 12 out of 500 people that auditioned that was chosen. And so I was on set basically the whole time they were in Philadelphia. So I earned enough money my own to buy a car and to go to California. So I was like, I'm going back out by myself. Yeah. That's where I'm meant to be. And the director who, this is another funny thing that happened. So as I'm out there in California and I have a job, I'm working in a mall at a clothing store, and who walks in but the director of The In Crowd? And he's like, hey, and I'm like, yeah, you told me to move out here and I did. And he's like, that's so great, So we stayed in touch and it was so cool to just, here I am 3,000 miles away by myself and it's all making sense. It's, all the signs are there just because I said yes and,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
I said yes to it. And
so you're a dancer too?
No.
Oh.
I'm not. I've got some moves at least, but I wouldn't call myself a dancer. Oh. And in fact, no one would call me a dancer.
We just had this conversation though because we said painting makes you a painter.
Right, this is true.
Oh, actively painting.
This is true. And I would say my dancing moment in the sun was at the Stonewall. Is the Stonewall still in existence here?
I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Bradbury Sullivan, the local LGBT center, because the Stonewall just recently closed. Oh. And they are doing an amazing capturing memory project. So you can submit to them. I'll have Ben put the URL to that in our episode information. But just very recently.
Oh my gosh, you have to share that with me because I had one of my fondest memories. Many of my fondest memories were at the Stonewall. And you know, like I said, my dancing moment in the set was at the Stonewall. Like, it was so fabulous. Oh my gosh. And I'm sure I was dancing to Madonna or something. But yeah.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that's so fun.
So you had mentioned that you were kind of back and forth from California multiple times.
Yeah.
So when was it that you kind of got into improv?
When I really got into it, it was here in the Lehigh Valley.
Wonderful.
So I can talk about that. Like, I was taking an acting class locally, and the funniest thing was, like, I was doing a serious scene, but people were laughing at me, and I was like, I wasn't offended. I was like, this is cool. People are laughing at me. I was a huge fan of, you know, Jerry Lewis growing up, and pratfalls were my thing. Like, I love sight gags. I mean, so I probably was doing that in my serious acting and not even realizing it, because, you know, I'm a physical person, and I was probably doing some physical comedy, you know, and so I was like, whoa, I love this. And, you know, I used to stay up late and watch Saturday Night Live, Carol Burnett, I mean, Fridays, you know, and what's super cool about that is Fridays, Melanie Chardoff used to be on Fridays, and she and I ended up becoming, you know, friends in California. It was so interesting. And it's not like she's on my speed dial, but I met with her and I got to share my stories about how much she influenced me. And, you know, it was really cool. And, you know, we're Facebook friends now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But yeah, that was really big for me. And so from that, I met a couple guys. One of the guys that was in the arts community was a guy named David Lally. Now, David is local. He is in New York right now. He's an actor, and he had been in Chicago, and I think he was with the Annoyance Theater, which is super popular from the improv explosion. And he started an improv sketch group here. We wrote sketches, we did improv together, and we had a blast. And we even went and performed up in New York City. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And then there was a local sketch show here that was fairly popular called the Sturdy Beggars Comedy Show, and Joe and Jerry Long. And so we kind of naturally gravitated towards that. And we were in that show. Nori and I just did everything. We just yes-anded everything. And we were just looking for stuff to do. And so we did it, and that was fun. And then when I was moving out to California, I, you know, again, was that culture shock that I was speaking of earlier, and going out and playing pool, and then realizing, okay, we were in Long Beach at that time, but Todd had gotten a job up in LA proper, in West LA. So now we're in Hollywood. And I'm like, Second City, oh my gosh, I could take classes there. And that's how that started. I took classes at Second City with some really great people. And then I wanted to get on stage like most people who are like, you know, really into it. You know, we could and we could do the jams on the weekends. You know, after hours, but getting up on stage was really tricky because they were well established at this point. I mean, the people that were on stage at that time already have shows on Comedy Central now, like Derek Waters was on stage at the time.
Wow. No way.
Yeah. And so, you know, one late night conversation, we're all talking about it. And somebody said, you know, Wagner, if you want to get on stage, go to I.O. You know, they just opened. And so I did. And it's funny because it's very incestuous. I mean, like a lot of the teachers that were teaching at Second City were also teaching at I.O. And by level 3, I was on stage with a group of girls called Wink, you know, and we were having a blast, the time of our lives. We got invited to perform all over the country. We got invited to perform at the Del Close Marathon in Chicago. And we got,
that's so cool.
And in New York.
Yeah.
And we got invited to perform in Louisiana. And we won Best in Fest there.
That's so cool.
It was so much fun. I mean, it was more fun than I could even describe.
I could imagine.
So for me and for our listeners, I'm very familiar with the concept of like a jam for musicians, but how does that translate into comedy? Like, what's an improv jam?
an improv jam is where you'll do different games. And so you can call it a game. So there's usually a host or two that's on stage, and they'll call the game, okay, we're going to start off with hands. And I'm sure you've all seen hands because a lot of YouTubers are doing it right now. It's very popular. And this was a really fun thing to watch for the audience. So they would have, okay, I need 2 actors, and they would have 2 actors come up on stage. They would get 2 suggestions, a location and who they were. And then they would do hands. And then so, like, for example, I would put I would stand behind Ben and put my hands underneath his arms, and he would put his hands behind his back, and he would start doing a scene, and my hands would inform the scene. So that's a jam. Freeze tag is another super popular jam. So you get up and you go, okay, Ben, Elise, up on stage. Okay, I need a suggestion for a time and a place, and I need a suggestion for an occupation. What, waiting room at a doctor's office. Okay, go. And then you just start off and you're like, oh, come here often, or whatever the case. And you kind of establish a connection between the two of you or not, and, grow that, and then someone from the audience will get a great idea and go freeze, and you have to freeze wherever you are in the scene, and they'll come up and they'll tap you, you go away, and they'll take over and change the scene. So it's a really neat skill for an improver who does, like a group setting improv to learn, is freeze tagging, because a lot of times when a scene is starting to kind of flatline a little, it's a skill to know when to go freeze and then stop the scene and go in and support it. And a lot of young improvisers will freeze right away before, the actors on stage even have a line out. So that's another skill to learn, is like, let the scene breathe for a minute, because that's what improv is all about. Like seeing where this is going to take us, and supporting one another. So if you feel like the actors on stage are stuck, then you can go freeze, and I'm going to come help you, because that's what it's about.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Yeah, that's so fun. Oh my gosh, I love it. Fellow improvisers out there listening, please contact us so we can start a jam with y'all. We've got the place here.
That would
Steel
be
Pencil Studios.
So much fun.
Oh
Absolutely.
My gosh, good times, man.
Send us an email. Direct message us. Let us know if you're interested.
I know there's a big improv community at Steel Stacks Arts Quest.
Yeah, through Arts Quest there is. Awesome. I really enjoy it. They also do quite a few at the Emmaus Theater. There's comedy nights all the time.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I love Emmaus. I think it's a hotbed of creativity.
Absolutely.
I want to move to Emmaus. I'm kind of on the outskirts in Lower McKenzie, but I keep telling my daughter, like, this is where we're going to move, and I'll drive around the triangle. And she's like, no.
They have such a fun setup at the Emmaus Theater for that too.
For sure.
And what's this isn't improv, but I'll shout out to Abby Roscoe. Who had shared her partner is part of, I really hope I'm getting this right, the Easton Comedy Offensive. And they hold every Sunday night a comedy open mic in her studio space in Easton, which is fantastic. So if you're interested in that, you can find Abby through our podcast. But I went before. It's a lot of fun.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah. So and the idea is for us all to support one another, because we're all really trying to do this, and this is a passion. This is fueled by passion. There's no other reason to be doing improv. Is you're fueled by that creative energy and that connection that you get from the people on stage with you. I mean, one of our warm-up exercises before our performance was like this crazy, where we would huddle. We had like 12 women in huddle, and we would count to 20. And we would count because in a way that we wouldn't talk over one another. So it would go 1, and you wait. And then another person would say 2. And then if 2 people said it at the same time, you start at 1 again. So you train yourself to listen to one another, not just with your ears.
Oh, that's what a cool exercise in like collective energy. Because, very cool.
That's it. And that's the jam. And that's like jamming with, jazz musicians. It's the same thing. Like, you're listening. You're not just playing. You're listening. You're connecting. With drum circles, same thing. Like, you're jiving with one another. You know,
That's funny that you say that, because I was actually thinking of that I'm a violinist and played the violin through elementary school, middle school, high school, and some in college. In orchestra, like a traditional orchestra setting. And I had a band director when I was in high school who, if we would start something and he could tell by section if one of the sections was off, he would say, stop, start over. You're not listening to each other. What a cool skill to learn because of music, but just to I don't know. I've tied this in a couple episodes, but like the spatial awareness that comes along with being a creative or being an artist, whether that's visual art, performing art, music, comedy, whatever, that you have to become so aware of your surroundings to translate that into creative expression. And that's funny that that's a very heavy crossover theme between improv comedy and orchestral music.
Yeah, but it makes so much sense, doesn't it? I
Definitely.
mean, because our surroundings do inform us as we go through life. You know, we're moving through life and we're taking it in from with all of our senses, and we're taking it in from everything that's in life. Like right now in this room, we're all taking things in, you know, as you know, we listen to one another, and as you know, the temperature in the room and the lights, everything is affecting what we're doing right here and right now. And it's making this amazing podcast.
Well, I'd like to jump into that because I am obsessed with the concept of spatial awareness. And the first time it's come up in this podcast was, oh gosh, I'm not even sure what episode it was, but the one where we talked about the Joseph Greenberg statue at the public library and the spatial awareness of public art, like how you interpret public art is heavily based on the surrounding and not even necessarily based on the piece. And it's kind of twofold. But how does that relate to improv comedy? Because sometimes, a lot of the time, you're in kind of a black box theater setting where there isn't a space and you have to imagine it.
You have to create it.
Right.
You create the space, and that's how you do it. That's how you inform it, and that's how you connect with it, because you have two people on stage, and that you don't know what that person's going to be doing. So you kind of listen and you see, and you add to it. You know, so if you're telling me there's a rocket ship behind me, the worst thing I can do is say, no, there's not. That's stupid. Because then I shut you down. And that's communication shut down when we say no to people, which is why I have this, you know, kind of how do we flip the script for our kiddos with, you know, positive parenting, improvised parenting. And it's the same concept. Like, you know, a lot of times kids come up with crazy stuff, and it's our job as parents to try to see the world through their eyes, I would imagine, you know. So the way we do that is we say, yes. Oh, yeah, there is a rocket ship behind me. How did that get there? You know, and we start talking about their idea. And we start seeing the world through their eyes. So when you're on a stage with somebody, that's what you're doing, you know, and I'm going to start talking to you about what you see, and then you're going to start talking to me about what I see, and the audience is going to love it. And it doesn't have to be funny. I mean, I can tell you the best improv I've seen in my life was this 2-person improv in Chicago, TJ Jagodowski and Dave, and I always forget Dave's name, and I'm sorry, Dave. But these guys are famous. Every improviser knows who they are.
Wow.
Because they were impeccable at giving each other space. So the scene starts out with the two of them fishing, and it's just silence for the whole beginning of the scene, because they let each other be quiet and they listened to each other. And I was like, I couldn't breathe. I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever, you know, because a lot of times that nervous energy on stage for improvisers, we're like rushing to say something, rushing to have this great idea, and rushing to be funny. And the best stuff is in the quietness, in that space, you know, in that listening to one another, in that truth, you know. So that's my spiel.
No, I love that. And I love the idea of how do you create spatial awareness in a space where nothing exists, kind of thing. Well,
just answered it. You create it.
Right. Absolutely.
You define it. You define that space. This is my kitchen. Don't go in. Don't come in my kitchen. You know better. Like, you can start the scene off that way. You know you're not supposed to come in here. And all of a sudden the audience sees the kitchen. Right?
Right.
Definitely.
That's very cool.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. So going from improv, then, where did that lead you to next?
So real life intervened with improv at a certain point. I met my ex-husband. At the time, he wasn't even my friend, but now he's my ex-husband. I met my husband at the pool hall. He was a bartender there, and he was a new bartender. So we go to Vegas every year in July. We come back and we take breaks because it's a lot of pool for a lot of time. So you need a break. And when I came back from break, there was a new bartender. And I'm like, who are you? And he's like, I'm Eric. And I was like, okay. And then the minute I met him, I don't believe in this, people. But the minute I met him, I was like, I'm going to marry that guy and have babies with him. And sure as bleep, that's what happened. I was like, wait a minute. Did my thought inform the action, or was that meant to happen? Like the existential question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But so when I met him, we started to build a life together, and I couldn't be at Improv Olympic every single night doing lights, attending other people's shows. So, it was like, okay, now things changed, and I said yes and to this part of my life. And that's how that happened. So I kind of transitioned away from improv for a little bit and into my real life, or the life that is expected of us, I would say. Get married, have kids, do all that, So I did that. I said yes to that. It was cool. Yeah, it led me to here. So I can't begrudge any of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. So the concept of yes and your parenting style is heavily intertwined, as we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I will frame it as you are raising a creative.
Yes, aren't we all?
But you are also helping other people inform their parenting decisions with the tools used in improv.
Yeah, I think that we're held back in our parenting. A lot of parents are held back in our parenting by societal constructs, by expectations that are, were put in place by the way we were parented, whatever way that was, and also by what, other people tell us, So in the world of the internet, we have access to everything and anything we could ever want to know, so we truly are know-it-alls in a sense, because we are, information is a Google click away. So if you want to know about how to be a parent, you can look it up online. But it's also what we were talking about earlier. Like if you want to be a teacher, don't go to school to learn how to be a teacher. Spend time with kids, because that's how you learn to be a teacher, because you are supporting their development.
Right.
You're not getting a paycheck being a teacher. So if that's what you're in it for, I don't know what to tell you. You're misinformed, because you're not getting that pay. They're not getting a big paycheck as a teacher. I can tell you it's not a living wage for a single mom. And that was heartbreaking, because I had a very successful program in California and Los Angeles. And then I moved back here to be with family and really struggled to find my legs here, just because, obviously, again, it's the reverse culture shock coming back to where I came from, but having things having been changed here to a great deal. And then also my whole life there for the past 23 years had informed me to be who I ended up being at that point. So it's very different. And I struggled to find my way. I struggled to define myself here, because it's very different.
Yeah.
And in improvised parenting came out of that. It came out of just a lot of meditation and just a lot of listening, being still and listening. Like, what am I supposed to do here? What am I here for? And really tuning into that, getting connected to, say, the hive mind of my like-minded people.
Sure.
And what do they need? And serving the needs of my community. That's what it's all based in, after all. So your podcast titled Improvised Parenting. Yeah. I'm very big on themes. I tie themes between episodes, tie themes in my artwork, tie themes in everything. What are some very common themes? Because you have quite a few episodes now. What are some common themes that come up in your podcast? Common themes that come up are basically rethinking the parenting model. A lot of times, we're the elder, as it were, we're the mentor in the situation. So we take on that role at, with some weight. There's a lot of weight around having to inform another human being on how to live a life. I mean, it's so heavy. Like, everything we say and do is going to impact this human, and it's going to inform who they become, especially in the first formative years. Those first 2 years, that attachment bond has to be there, because otherwise there are very palpable deficits, if not, the brain doesn't grow as much as it could if there's not that physical connection to each other, and then after 2, the child started, the brain, all the parts of the brain are starting to turn on, because when they're born, only 80% of the brain is, active. So, around 3.5, that prefrontal cortex engages and they have the executive functioning turning on. So now we can start to engage with them in a more, in a more heightened way. It's not just moving them from place to place. So we have to grow in the way we communicate with them. We have to grow with them, as it were. And the challenge for us as parents, I think, is because it's so much growth exponentially in such a short period of time. We're not used to that. It's a lot for us to take in, because in that growth is also loss. So it's not my child's not a baby anymore. That there's a part of parents, especially mothers, who this is a physical embodiment of me. And this came out of my body. This is my, there's a saying, this is my heart walking outside of me now, So that there's so much around that, we don't give enough attention to, we don't have enough gratitude for, and I feel like, or we just don't have enough awareness of, like, this human knew everything coming in. They know everything. We know less because it's been conditioned away from us, conditioned out of us. So they're here to teach us. So they're bringing us back to the beginning to say, this is the purest place you can be. This is where you learn so much so quickly as a human.
What a fascinating perspective that is, to see the child as the one that knows everything, and the adult or the parent who has had everything taken away from them. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And imagine, I have goosebumps, guys. Imagine if we parented with that in mind. Imagine if we looked at our child and said, welcome, teacher, I'm so glad you're here. I really need your help. And if we looked at our children as heightened beings that they are, you know what I mean? And if we just supported them and we just said yes and to them with structure, because we're keeping in mind that children do definitely need structure. So that is our job, is to love, support, and give them structure. So because people who go out in the world without boundaries or limitations have a hard time. They have a hard time in relationships, and they have a hard time understanding what they can and can't do. There's too much information and I'm not just talking about the internet. There's just too much coming at us all at once. We drive down the street, there's cars, there's people talking, there's screaming. It's a lot. There's a cacophony of noise here on this planet, so structure is a safe place to learn in, a sandbox, if you will.
Something that you mentioned when you came in was you have a concept in your podcast that you refer to that parallels a concept we talk about in our podcast.
Yeah.
In improvised parenting, it is called the parent wound.
Yes.
And here at Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast, it has been referred to the artist wound.
Yes.
I'm glad we were able to connect over that concept, because I thought that was very cool.
Yeah. And I loved hearing you talk about it, because I was like, I can't wait to talk to Elise about this, because I think the artist wound is very similar to the parent wound, and it has the very similar symptoms. Okay. So our wounds remind us that there's pain. So, we want to address that pain. Where does this pain come from? So we need to go on an exploration and really look into that. And the artist pain, or the artist wound, would most likely be from the inability to express yourself truly and wholly as a human. And that most likely, in my experience, comes from limiting beliefs that were fed to us in the first 7 years of our lives. You can't do this. If you do this, that's going to lead you down this road. Here's the things that you should be doing. All of the shoulda, woulda, coulda stuff that we have going on in our brain. This tape that we have on repeat. On loop. So it's the same with the parenting wounds, and the parenting wounds come from very similar source. So, when I grew up, I'm 55. So my parents were, I guess their parents were in the post-war depression. And so they grew up in a, with a lack mentality that seems to be very prevalent in this area. And so it's reinforced. It's continuously reinforced. And there's nothing that's, saying, hey, what about this? It's all like we talk about what we can't do and what we don't have and the pain we have and all the problems that are around us and that prevent us from getting what we want or doing what we want. And by saying that, you create more of that. When you start to talk about what I can do and what and have these images in your head of the beauty, all the stuff that you can do, you create more of that. So we make choices in our thinking. The parenting wound comes from those misguided choices that were important at that time. The fear-based thinking, the lack-based thinking, but that was then. And we get to rewrite it. We get to write it for ourselves. So that's how you fix your wounds. But it's not just like, okay, now I know and I can do that. You really got to go deeper into your subconscious where the wounds were created.
Right. That's interesting. I just had had a conversation about this concept with our friend and listener, Angie. But I know that Liz and Ben and I have had this conversation before too, and I never really thought about it in conjunction with the artist wound. But that idea of in a society where art might not be as valued as much as it should be, where does necessity lie? And you can tie it back to at the very core of a human existence, there were people making cave art about their life as a form of self-expression in a time period where survival was at the root of existence. You were conducting your life in a way that to make you survive. But in that time, they were still making art.
Gregorian chant too.
Yeah, because it was it was necessity as a form of expression. And the conversation I was having with our friend Angie was that it's amazing how, and I don't know if full circle is the right, but how are almost back to that point where we are doing everything we can to, quote, survive in a capitalist focused society or however you want to view it. And is art that's still the necessity? So in that process to survive, is art a necessity? I think yes. Or else we wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Absolutely. Nothing informs us more than the need to survive, right? So if we talk about our most recent experience in 2020, we saw people go really deep into who they were creatively, and we saw it all over the internet in such an empowering way for everybody. And I think art is at the root of our survival. Like you said, you so beautifully said that self-expression it's intrinsic. It's imploring us to get out. It needs to get out. Okay. I am a big believer that, we live in a world of duality. We have dark and light. We have up and down. And so we go in ebbs and flows. And so we are in this really extreme curve of survival. And it makes me think of like back in the day in the Black Plague when Isaac Newton was like, away in a room writing and just writing. And a lot of the stuff that he was writing, a lot of the scientific stuff that he was expressing from himself was unheard of at the time. Definitely not accepted, especially by the church. But he was compelled by expressing himself. And he pushed us so much further in such a short time. And I think that it's important as the human race for us to have those ebbs and flows. So, the film industry has the same thing. It goes independent films, blockbusters, independent films, blockbusters. Every industry has it. Everywhere you look, these patterns exist, and they're based on a formula that we can't even comprehend. But if we have the eyes to see it, we can recognize it.
Definitely. I think it's a little twofold too, because it is self-expression, but art is also a form of communication, which is also necessary.
Of course.
Absolutely. And so we're again in a capitalist society, and a lot of people are having a really hard time expressing themselves.
Yeah.
People are like, I don't know how to survive with this right now. here's what I made.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think there are people who don't even recognize it as making art, but that's what they're doing.
Exactly.
Right.
Fascinating.
Well, and that's where the non-fungible token society came from, is because we want to support each other in our art. I think we need to support each other in our art.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can find a way to do that collectively, then capitalism is in trouble. It really is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because that's what compels us away or pushes us away from our need, our art, our artistic expression is the need for survival. And it's almost like what they say, the hamster wheel. So, we get up, we go to work, we come home, we watch TV, we go to bed, that cycle, that vicious cycle of not expressing ourselves.
But you watch TV, and who makes the television shows? Artists.
Right. So we're experiencing art from bystander, as opposed to a participant.
Sure.
In a way we are participating by watching it because we're validating the effectiveness or the importance of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's important too. We need to go sit in seats. We need to go sit in the movie theaters. We need to go to all of the, comedy shows. We need to support our improvisers and get out there and get our butts in the seats at ArtQuest, now that we can.
Right.
But I'll tell you what, art will not be held back because improv is one of the hardest things that translates if it outside of a live setting, and you really saw people bring it to life online. I mean, I saw some of the best improv I've ever seen online, like this throughout this pandemic. I mean, people just digging deep and making it work because they are so compelled to do it.
That actually was a question I wanted to bring up because it may or may not start an argument, quote, quote. But where is the stronger value, or is it of equal value, people who consume art or people who make art? And I personally think that art doesn't have to be made for other people, but generally is and definitely can be. But that's interesting that you bring it up in terms of improv, because does improv have value if there's no live audience? And of course it does.
Yeah, improv has value to the performers. And I think that one informs the other. So really it's important to have both because it creates an energy that, like I was saying earlier, expands. And if we look at, this macrocosmic theory of, the universe is based on expansion. Why wouldn't we be as a microcosm of that macrocosm? We are expanding as humans. We're growing as humans. So if we elect to be stagnant, we are resisting our intention, who we are. And so the capitalistic part of it is it's just a cog in a wheel. We happen to live in the United States and be in a capitalistic society, but we could also be, in the jungles of Peru and still doing it and still enjoying it. And money doesn't matter. We could be trading fishing poles made of sticks for it. It doesn't matter. None of that doesn't matter to the art itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in improv, before you brought up the importance of listening, and I've been doing a lot of that this episode and not asking a lot of questions.
You're a good listener, Ben.
But one of the questions I do have, taking it back to improvised parenting. So much like I've been sitting here listening and learning from you, what is something or the biggest thing that you've learned from one of your guests on the show?
One of my guests that agreed to come on my show that blew me away was my former professor, Elizabeth Evans. And it's so funny because, like I was saying earlier, when I was in school, getting my degree, I was also in my third trimester, and I had my baby in March of my final semester of school. And it was just funny. Her class is one of the classes that I took a lesser grade in, but she was one of the most valued teachers. That teacher that you want to make a good impression on? Sure. She was that teacher. And to find that we've come full circle, and she was a guest on my podcast, and we speak the same language, and her mission is so similar to mine. It's just so beautiful to learn that about her. And we're going to have a series, the two of us, because going back to capitalism, not being able to afford parent support shouldn't prevent parents from having support. And I'm going to cry because it's not fair. Every parent needs support. You know, I was a single mom. I needed support. I even knew what I was doing and I still needed support. It's so important. And it's not fair that it's not available to everybody for free. It should be.
Absolutely.
And so that is our mission for the entire world. It's our God-given gift, and it's our mission.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I got emotional.
No, that's important. Yeah, and speaks a lot to what drives you and your projects and your work.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
It's deeply rooted passion of mine.
Yeah.
Deeply rooted.
Now, would you say, with not just improvised parenting, but everything else that you do, that's what drives you to do it?
I would say, passion. Passion for what I'm doing. I can't not do something I'm passionate about, and I can't do something I'm not passionate about. I struggle with doing something that's just rote or doesn't serve a purpose, you know, to other people.
Yeah.
That connects right back to your creative process.
Yeah.
It starts with an idea.
Yeah.
And goes from there.
Yeah.
An idea and a passion for it.
Yeah. Passion.
And saying yes.
Yes. Saying yes to your passion and honoring that passion, because that passion is the truth of who you are. It is at the core of it.
You're wonderful, Laurie.
Oh my God, you guys are so wonderful back. Shh, don't look, everybody. Oh, I love you guys.
Oh my goodness. Well, you have a great voice for a microphone.
Thank you.
You are very welcome.
Thank you.
What has that voice done on the microphone?
I have been told that I have a good voice for radio and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I was talking before about when I was doing spoken word here in the Lehigh Valley. And we did Pass the Book, which came out of, you know, an improvised writing format. My writing partner, Laurie and Nori, were offered a radio show. And from that radio show, I had my own radio show on WMUH Allentown, 91.7, the only station that matters. Shout out to my peeps. And my show was called The 50-Foot Queenie, and I loved it. It was the most fun I ever had because just you get to do whatever you want as long as you're not playing like pop radio, you know, and you're not playing songs with curse words in it, which I did sometimes by accident. So sorry, peeps. But sorry, not sorry. And but yeah, and so that led to, you know, just this confidence behind a mic and not being afraid, because a lot of people have that fear of like speaking into mic. My sister was going to do a podcast. She has some really great ideas, and she bought a mic and she bought a setup and she recorded and she said, I hate my voice. I'm not doing it. And she gave me her microphone. And I was like, that shouldn't stop you. Just do it. Your voice matters.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so powerful. One thing I learned in radio was that it's our job to put our art, what we have to offer out there. And that's it. We're not responsible for who gets it, who likes it, how they receive it. None of that is our responsibility. We just need to put it out there.
For sure.
You know, and share it. That's what we're here for, is to inform everybody else to, you know, that here's this. You can take it and do what you want with that, you know? And then from that, I ended up in voiceover in California. So that somewhere in between working at 20th Century Fox, doing improv, I had, you know, a day job. And that was doing voiceover in the video game industry. So I wasn't the voiceover artist, however, I was the coordinator. So it was my job to call up the agencies and hire Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants, to come into our studio for 20 minutes and get this big fat check. But I mean, I thought, wow, this is an amazing life. I want to do this. So, you know, I started to learn more about voiceover and I started to work with more voiceover people. You know, they became my friends, and Now, my friend Hannah and I, during the pandemic, decided that we're both going to be narrators. And I say it like that because she's British and she says narrator. We're going to be narrators. And I was like, yes, we're going to be narrators, And so we talked about getting mics and doing it. And it was just kind of another yes and.
Yeah.
Of course, because I did the radio show and I worked in the voiceover industry, of course I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So that's
so
what
fun.
I did. I have a Rode NT1A in my basement.
Nice.
With, 4 audio mute panels and, ready to go.
Yeah.
I've seen your setup over Zoom and very impressive.
It's so fun,
Oh, that's so fun.
Well, and that's another thing that I want to share is it wasn't hard to do. It's just a matter of saying yes and then just pulling all the tools in, telling the universe, okay, this is what I'm going to do now. Okay. And by telling the universe, you're just you're saying, yes, this is what I want to do. And, help me find it.
Definitely.
And manifesting it, like you said earlier, Elise, because one of my favorite stories about manifesting for me was when my daughter was a little tiny. And, the popular thing to do back then was to make these homemade tents out of 4 bamboo poles and a nice pretty sheet. And I had the pretty sheet, but I didn't have the 4 bamboo poles. And so I was like, I got to get 4 bamboo poles. So I took my dog for a walk and we're walking around the block and leaning against a dumpster were 4 bamboo poles. And I looked at my husband at the time and I said, those are for me. And it was like this, I didn't even know they were there. Do you know what I mean? It was like this thing, I asked the universe for these. I said, this is what I need. And then I went for a walk and there they were. And I was like, well, those must be for me because I just asked for those. And so we took them home and put them up. And my daughter had a tent in our living room where the pool table used to be for years.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It's that simple, people. It's really that simple. Believing in yourself, knowing. It's that saying that always pops into my head. I know, like I know, like I know. When you trust your gut and you feel into your gut and this is what you're supposed to be and supposed to do, like this podcast, you knew you were supposed to do this. So you just said, let's do it. You knew you were supposed to build this studio, Ben.
Yeah.
And you guys just said, there's nothing stopping us. And if there is, we'll find a way around it. We'll find a way to get what we need to make this a reality.
Yeah.
The best phraseology for manifesting something that I love, and I think of it often, is I don't chase something, I attract it.
Yes,
so if you are meant to have it, you will have it.
Can I give a yes, queen? Come on, girl.
And what's the second part of it? I don't chase, I attract. What belongs to me will find me.
That's right. What you are seeking is also seeking you. Yeah. Yes.
I love that.
So when I lived in Texas, I went to Austin Film Festival. And when I went there, it was the year that Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird came out.
Stop.
And it was one of the films playing at the festival, and she was there. So it played, and she talked a bit about how the movie came to exist. She's like, I wrote it. I wanted to be the writer, and I knew that it had to happen. So in order to get it to happen, I put myself as the director. And the whole time thinking to myself, I'm going to find somebody to direct this. It'll be fine. And I can start writing the next thing. Got closer and closer to time. She's like, this needs to happen. I haven't found a director yet. What am I going to do? And she's like, wait, I'm the director. From the beginning, I've been the director and this has to be made. So she did it. And she fell in love with it. And she's like, I knew this needed to exist. And so I followed what the universe was telling me to do and narrowing me to do because I couldn't find anyone else to do it. So I went for it. And it was so cool to hear her talk about that.
Yeah. It's so true. Because, these kids who are just compelled to do it. These, I think back in time when I was in the independent film realm and, the Harmony Korine's of that time period, they're just compelled to do it. They have to do it. Wes Anderson, his films weren't publicly, they weren't based on what we, societal constructs. They were based on these oddities, and some of the best films out there. They are some of the, I mean, oh my gosh.
The intricacies of noticing little things.
Yes.
It's like, that's what I love about
Definitely.
them.
Yes. Yeah. One time I was at the screening of Punch Drunk Love and P.T. Anderson was there. And I watched the film in the back row in amazement. I was clenching the seat because I couldn't believe like the transitions, the sounds, the noises, the running. And I went up to him afterwards and I went to him and there was a crowd and I just parted the crowd and I looked at him and I said, the running. And we ended up making out afterwards. It was really cool.
Oh, that's so much fun.
That's not how I expected you to end that story, but I love it.
I just hope he wasn't with Maya at the time. I don't think he was. Yeah. Sorry, Maya. You are one of my heroes, but I didn't know.
Amazing.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yes, thank
Thank you guys. This has been the most fun. I really love it. Even though I'm sweating and I've taken off all my clothes, I'm still enjoying it. I don't have any shame.
Oh my goodness.
Laurie, so just real quick, if people want to find your podcast, I have your website here. It is www.theimprovisedparent.com. And you can also find Laurie on Instagram at theimprovisedparent.
Yeah, and I have a new digital card on Linktree. So you can find everything there at Linktree. That's linktr.ee/theimprovisedparent. And that'll give you the links to all of my social media, everything that, all the podcasts, all my videos, my private free parent support group. So it's all there.
Lovely.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for coming on and for sharing your resources.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been my pleasure and joy.
So during our episode with Laurie, we talked a little bit about the Stonewall Memories project. So that is our opportunity of the week. Stonewall Lehigh Valley has been a place of connection and community for so many LGBTQ people for nearly 50 years. Its closure truly marks the end of an era. As our community remembers good times at Stonewall, the Lehigh Valley LGBT Community Archive wants to collect these memories and preserve them for the future. Share your memories, stories, experiences, and photographs from or about Stonewall Lehigh Valley. These submissions will become part of Bradbury Sullivan's permanent community archive to be sure that our local LGBTQ history is not lost. This effort is co-chaired by Ariel Torres, Stephen Libby, and Emma Smith. Memories that are collected will be included in a future public exhibit and in a special issue of the Gay Journal. You can share your memories through this project supported by the Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Center at bradburysullivancenter.org/archives.
Yeah, make sure that you submit anything that you have. That's a good opportunity.
Sounds like Laurie will be.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in this week. This is the Lehigh Valley Arts Podcast recording here at Steel Pixel Studios in downtown Bethlehem. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.